Hi.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Darren Mar-Elia. I'm VP of Products here at Semperis.
Ron Harel, AVP Security Products.
And really happy to talk about some of the free stuff that we're doing here at Semperis to try to make your lives easier and your environments hopefully more secure. So we're going to talk about Purple Night. How many of you have tried Purple Night? Okay, there's a
Almost
good
everyone.
mix. And then how many, we're going to also talk about Forest Druid. How many of you have tried Forest Druid? Okay, a fewer, but a good list. Okay, so we'll go ahead and Rand's going to start with talking about Purple Night, and we'll go from there.
All right. So how many people like free tools, though? I think that's the important question. Okay. So for those who are not familiar with Purple Night was first released, what now, 2.5 years ago?
Yeah.
Version 1, we had, I think, 20, 30 security indicators, right? Indicators of exposure, looking for misconfigurations in AD, on-prem AD. Since then, what I'm going to show now is version 4.0. We've got about 140 indicators now. We added Azure AD, hybrid indicators, right? So indicators that are looking at the combination of on-prem AD and Azure AD, Entra AD. And we are now also adding Okta. So the doors are closed. The press release is not out yet. Y'all are getting kind of a sneak peek preview of us adding Okta. We're releasing it with about 12 or 13 different indicators. The research team is still working on the last one, so I can't promise 13, but that's what we're going for. And let me show it to you. Also, for those who have used Purple Night, one of the things that we got feedback on that people didn't like so much was the fact that every time we had an update, you had to download the whole thing all over again and do everything over again. So that's done. We have a new update mechanism. You update from within the tool, download the indicators, run it, right? Those who are not familiar with Purple Night, the purpose of this tool is democratization of AD security, right? So it's about taking the knowledge that we have around AD and really making it very, very simple, very, very easy to use. 5, 6 clicks, it runs, in a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and you get a very easy to read and actionable report. We'll go over it quickly, but really that's the goal, right? Click, download, no installation, run it, no special privileges required, normal domain user, put in your tenant information, you run it, you get the report, and you remediate.
Which, and it also, if you haven't seen it, gives you a letter grade, which if any of you have had PTSD from grade school grading, it really hits home, but it's actually really easy to communicate to higher ups who want to know how well you're doing on AD security. So that part of it has really resonated with a lot of folks.
All right, so I'm not going to do a live demo. I try to avoid those if I can. So this is a recording. Sorry for the flickering. And you download the zip file, you open it, double-click Purple Night, and it just runs, right? All you need to be is domain-joined PC or have a domain user run as, and it runs.
You don't even need a domain-joined PC. You can run it on a member machine.
Yep.
It does actually, as long as you have sufficient privileges to be able to read AD, it works.
Except the EULA. By the way, the reason it takes a bit of time to boot up is because all the indicators are digitally signed. You can't feed your own indicators into Purple Night. All of them are signed. You can view the source code of the indicators from within Purple Night, right? So it's all open. Put in your tenant information, on-prem AD, Azure, and all right, on this screen, and we'll look at a few indicators, but on this screen you can actually go into each indicator. You can read the metadata, the description, the impact, severity, categories, things like that. All right, we run it.
And you'll notice there's a bunch of different categories of indicators for AD, account security, group policy, AD infrastructure, Kerberos, et cetera, as well as Okta and Azure AD. So yeah, the question was about how does this compare to, we have a commercial product called Directory Services Protector. It does all of the same indicators. It does some additional indicators because we have change history of AD, so we can do indicators based on change history, and it's running continuously, whereas this is just, you run it once, you get a report. You can, of course, run it again, But yeah, that's one of the main differences, or those are the main differences.
And of course, you have history and all
Yeah,
that.
you have history of.
All right, and you get the score. And then from this screen, you can immediately view the HTML dynamic report. You can save all the data to a CSV file, Excel spreadsheet, and then move it to mitigation.
And absolutely no judgment on Okta here.
So let's take a look at the report. This is what the report looks like. So with 4.0 previous versions, you'd get a bunch of files, and you'd have to open up the HTML. Here, you just get one HTML file if you want to view it HTML, or a PDF file if you just want to send it somewhere. So anybody who's seen Purple Knight before, not much has changed in terms of the layout. We get the security posture score, as Darren mentioned. We got an F on Okta, D on AD, and B in Azure. And then we have the breakdown of all of the different indicators, starting with the critical IOEs that we should be remediating first, split by the platform where it was detected on. And then on the left side, we have the menu where we can view all of the information about all of the indicators, those that were found, those that were not found, broken down by the platform. Right, so maybe let's just take a look at a few of them. I don't know, what is of interest? So of course, we have the DC sync, SMB v1. SMB v1 is a pretty common one. Reversible passwords found in GPOs.
My personal
still
favorite.
have this?
That was like the #1 attack vector that were, when I was looking at data of how attackers were getting into environments, looking for admin passwords still stored in GPOs was like the lowest hanging fruit possible. And it happened in a lot of environments.
So we have here guests having permissions to invite other guests, right, in Azure. That's a nice one, right? So this is a lateral movement, right? We can provision other people. This one's passed, legacy auth.
We provide, you'll notice that for anything that fails, we'll have remediation steps in there.
Right.
And I think this is like a constant sort of effort for us to provide more and more information around remediation steps. I think where we'd ultimately like to get to is to provide like script code for people to use and be able to customize for your environment to be able to remediate some of this stuff. In some cases, it's very step-by-step. In some cases, it's a little bit more general because it's kind of environmental specific. But the point is, we're trying to help you figure out what to do to remediate some of these things.
And anybody who's been to our AI talk yesterday, we're also working with AI to try to get very contextualized, very personalized remediation information without hallucination, of course. That's the big challenge there. Anything specific anybody kind of wants to take a look at before we move on? So right now we support Okta, Entra AD, and on-prem AD, and we're looking at where to expand further, right? So what specifically are you thinking about? Like ping or something like that? Oh, MFA provider, such as? So we do have MFA configurations. We look at MFA configurations within Azure. For example, admins who don't have an MFA enabled, right? That'll bring down the security posture considerably. I think we have that indicator, right?
I think so, yeah. And there's a lot of surface area in Azure AD to look at. So we are this is the area of growth for us right now is finding security controls in Azure AD that we can report out as kind of, let's say, suboptimal in a particular tenant environment. So we love suggestions, actually. If you can send to pk-community@semperis.com, and if you have suggestions on indicators, so pk-community, and we will take those and run with them because we
or Slack channel. Join the Slack channel.
Yeah, we have a Slack channel for both PK and Forest Druid.
Okay, so quick questions. I'm assuming with Active Directory as an LDAP call, with the Entra and Okta, is it a REST API call? How you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with Entra, it's graph, And I'm not sure what we're using for Okta, but
Yeah,
it's
Okta
probably
APIs.
whatever the equivalent is for Okta.
Yep. And Okta is actually easier because you don't need to install an enterprise app.
Okay, so while setting this up, do you have to put in the tenant ID for the Azure AD?
You do have to set up a app registration in your Azure AD tenant with Graph API permissions that we publish in order for us to be able to read against Azure AD. So obviously we have to be able to authenticate to it. We have to have the right permissions. So we do need that. That is kind of like a pre-step that you need to run through.
Will that be on the same UI with running for the assessment on premise? Or is it different?
Yes. Yeah, it runs all in the same UI.
Okay.
So it goes and talks LDAP to AD. It talks Graph to Azure AD and Okta-ness.
And somebody asked about Okta, but Okta's mostly kind of the same type of indicators that we look at when we look at Azure AD, right? Because they're both IDPs, so we're looking for MFA on admins and things like that. But it's going to be a different API call. It is different between platforms, so we look at it a little bit differently. But it's going to be mostly the same. And as we expand, we also are looking at the hybrid, right? So we're going to be looking, admins in AD that are also admins in Azure or something like that.
We do have some hybrid indicators today. There's like a few of them that are looking at, like he said, the sort of cross-identity system attack paths, try to finding weaknesses across the two identity systems.
Yes. Yeah. You
Yeah,
got Excel, CSV.
You can definitely export.
I don't think I have them here. I don't have no. I don't have them here. Do you happen to have one?
I might be able to.
I'm not on the VPN. I had some issues this morning.
So one thing to note is when you get the results, you're getting, like where it's relevant, you're getting a list of objects that are causing the result to fire positive. So if it's an Active Directory, you're going to get a list of computer accounts or user accounts or groups that are triggering that thing. And we've seen results where, like, here's a perfectly good one, password last set over a certain number of days. We've seen environments where they had 1,000 of those in the results, right? And you can take that data and put it out into Excel, and then you can go do something with it, like send nasty grams to all those people or something like that.
So the tool will actually default to, if you have a specific indicator with, as Darren said, 1,000 results, it'll show, the report will show the first 20, and then it'll tell you showing 1 to 20 of 2,000 or whatever, and then you get the 2,000 as a CSV file. By default, you can also save it as an Excel spreadsheet where it'll be set up by tabs. Each tab will have the indicator name, and you'll get all the results in the tabs. Yeah, go ahead.
For organizations that are full Azure AD, are your indicators different than what Microsoft gives you in the Compliance Center?
That's a good question.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think there's probably some overlap there.
Yeah.
We tend to get our feedback from the community, from our own security research. So my guess is that, Michelle. Yeah, thank you. That's a great. So is it purple-night.com? Purple-night.com. We have all the indicators published out there that you can look at them.
A similar question, actually. So for Azure AD, I wonder if you all can comment on the trend over time of default config for Azure AD, kind of like out of the box, so to speak. Mm-hmm. What does the trend look like in terms of if I ran Purple Night, if I just fired up a new tenant for Azure AD today versus a year ago versus whenever kind of some of the results, like how has that changed over time? Out of curiosity, if you have it.
I wish I knew. I don't know if I can comment on that. I think, listening to Alex's talk yesterday, I have to believe that it's gotten more buttoned down over time. Yeah.
And probably Tuda could attest that. But we've really tried to focus on the hybrid aspect because that's where we see a lot of the exposures. I know there were some conditional access policy things that are not set by default and that you want to set. Bless you. And we try to look at those, but we've been very much focusing on the hybrid aspect.
What would be really interesting, and I have to point this out, we don't collect any of this data from you. This is all held by you. What would be interesting is if we did, and if we could see those trends over time. But we're not doing that today.
Or maybe just
that's
the
coming
aggregates.
next year.
Maybe
the
just
aggregates,
the aggregate
right?
scores.
That's anonymized.
That'd be a metric, a meta-level metric. My quick question was, how hard would it be to do a diff? If I were to run this quarterly and show it as a metric to the board, saying, hey, we're getting better.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's parsing text is what it would take. We don't.
Community hasn't created a Python.
Well, you
That's a
have an
great
Excel
idea.
spreadsheet, so Excel.
We do.
You know?
Yep. That's a great idea. And actually, Rand mentioned that we have a Slack channel for Purple Knight and for Forest Druid. So there might be somebody out there doing that. I haven't seen it yet, but it's a great idea. Yes, question.
When you're running the data collector in Purple Knight, are you only looking at the default naming context, or do you look at other partitions like configuration?
We do have some indicators in AD that look at other, like configuration partition for relevant configurations that
You'll find
reside
passwords there also in the configuration partition.
Yep. Right. So, yeah, there are definitely other partitions that we look at.
Yeah. Just another indicator that I don't know if it is included, but computer passwords, they're always overlooked. 128
Yes.
character password, you don't have to worry about it because it's 30 days, it's going to rotate.
Yep.
But there are chances, or I have seen these where the computer account password is a 14-character lowercase password. And this happens, when you check pre-Windows 2000 compatible
Yeah.
and creating a computer object.
Right.
That's an easy way to get into Active Directory.
That's a good one.
I think we have some pre-Windows 2K indicators. We need to do the Forest Druid demo.
Yeah.
Guido is over there making sure I realize.
All right, we're going to do a quick switcheroo here, so bear with us. All right. Actually, one thing I just wanted to mention is if you're familiar with the ANSI, which is a French government set of regulations or standards around Active Directory configuration, we do have an ANSI scorecard in Purple Knight, which I think is kind of cool. I'm going to shift gears and talk about Forest Druid. So what is Forest Druid? So we talk about it as a tier 0 attack path analysis tool. So you're familiar with similar tools like Bloodhound. The way we think about things is kind of from the inside out. So we think about this tool as being a defender's tool as opposed to a red teamer's tool or a pen tester's tool. You're starting with a list of tier 0 resources. And right now we're focused on AD. I will also share as a kind of within this room spoiler that we're adding Azure AD support in the next month. But the bottom line here is what we're doing is we're starting with a set of well-known tier 0 resources, things like domain admins, domain controller computer objects, the domain NC head. These are objects for whose compromise would lead to a total loss of AD. And so what we do is we're building out a graph of relationships between those tier 0 objects and other objects within Active Directory. So if I just take away the visual graph here and just show the list, what you see here under target name are those tier 0 objects or tier 0 resources that I mentioned, and they're all the common ones that you would be familiar with. And the relation shows the relationship to that object by other objects. And relations are kind of, you can think of them as takeover mechanisms or takeover paths. So if I'm a member of a group, then I have a takeover relationship to that group. If I can force change password on a user object, then I have a takeover relationship to that user object. So what I'm doing here is building these relationships to give me visibility into where my tier 0 risks are. In a lot of organizations, especially ones that are sufficiently large, with Active Directory being 20 some odd years old, you have nested groups. You have users who have permissions and ACLs that have been granted over OUs that have been built up over time because somebody needed to get something done on a particular day. And so let's just give them full control because it's easier and it works. And all of those things end up building up these tier 0 attack relationships. So what we're trying to do here is surface these and give you the ability to basically squash them before they cause problems. And what I can do in the simplest case is I can say, okay, for example, I've decided that ADA should be a tier 0, so I'm going to mark ADA as tier 0, and that will essentially change my relationships. That means now that I've said ADA is tier 0, then any other objects that have a relationship to ADA now become within the scope of tier 0. And I can also increase the hop count. So right now I'm looking at 1 hop away from these tier 0 resources. If I increase the hop count, suddenly my relationships change and I see more objects in relation to those tier 0 objects.
So what we've actually tried to do here is to map kind of the privilege escalation points into tier 0, right? Because we want to be very, very focused on where a certain identity that is not commonly known as highly privileged identity can in fact become highly privileged and escalate those privileges. And very often we've seen that those are not known, right? So we want to be able to map those. And with Forest Druid, you can then export all of this data, right? So when you click the export button, and it's going to be up on the left.
Yep, sorry.
Right, they keep moving it around. When you export that, you get a spreadsheet, you get a CSV, and you have all of the objects that are classified as tier 0, so you can monitor them, right, whether within DSP or your other monitoring tools. And you also get a list of all of those orange dots, all of those privilege escalation points, all of those points that if an attacker takes over, they can get effectively into tier 0 by abusing that specific permission, right? So you always have that list in front of you. You run this. You get that immediately. You can do that, or you could do the normal, well-known attack path analysis flow, very similar to Bloodhound. We have a little bit of a different take on it. What I would ask, if you do get a chance to use Forest Druid, this is a research tool, right? Unlike Purple Knight, where it's been around for a while, and we've talked to so many people using it, Forest Druid is very much a research tool. So if you do use it, if you have insights, if you find it valuable, if you don't find it valuable, please let us know. I'd love to talk to anybody who's been using it, get some insights from y'all.
Yeah, we're super anxious to move this capability along, move this tool along, make it more usable, more actionable for folks. I saw a question back there. Yes,
absolutely.
So the question is there any plan to extend from tier 0 to be able to classify other tiers? We actually call this zones, I think is what Igor calls it. But yes, this is a really good point, right? So tier 0 in AD is certainly important to protect, but you have other tier 0s, if you will, within your environment. It could be a line of business application and the access to that, or other critical resources. So we want to be able to give you that same capability to map graph relationships between what's important to you and identity objects, basically.
And the new enterprise architecture. So you want to look at your entire control plane, right? That's the goal. And that might involve different platforms, different types of assets, and we want to be able to map all of that. You had a question?
Good question.
Oh.
So I asked Sean a question, and then he handed me the mic and told me to ask it again. So here I am asking again. That's like some really cool work you're doing, and the relationship maps are really awesome. And as a security nerd, I'm like, I want that in my SIEM, And so I'm wondering if you guys are thinking about plugging that into Sentinel, like using one of the Sentinel extensions and just making that something I can drag right into my identity investigation.
Yeah, so it's a great suggestion, and we have this concept of an identity graph, and it's a more generalized, sort of talks about the zones and some of the other things that we've mentioned, but we absolutely want to put this, sort of make this a continuous evaluation to give you visibility into how changes in the environment are affecting these attack path relationships and putting them into things like Sentinel or other SIEMs that are relevant to you, so that you can use this data to basically action changes within your environment, potentially even auto-remediate attack path changes that cause problems. So
we have a Sentinel app for DSP in the Sentinel marketplace.
Yep.
What you see again, this is a research tool. This gets integrated in our product, and then through the Sentinel app gets sent to the SIEM. Our goal is to have everything come together, right? So we have the identity graph. Over that, we overlay all our detection capabilities, all our exposure capabilities. Eventually, you'll have that graph. You'll be able to see the zones within your environment, whether it's control plane or any other type of zone you want to map. And over that, we'll overlay all of the information that we're able to collect with all our tools, and of course, interact with your SIEM, with Sentinel, to get that information on one dashboard and not 20.
And just to reiterate, you can get this data out in Excel and write PowerShell scripts against it, do reports against it. So it's not just a fancy relationship graph and a list. You can get at it with programmatically once you run it. And it is Again, just we're doing read access to AD, no privileged access required, at least at this point. I mean, I think at some point we may get to the point where we want to be able to see certain relationships that we can't see with an unprivileged user. But
I would definitely be curious to understand from y'all's perspective kind of what the future looks like, where you want to take Druid, and kind of how that compares.
I'll say it in a few words. And Bloodhound is an awesome tool, right? I don't. They took a different approach to how. Okay, so we all do attack path analysis. Attack paths. You go from here. The question is, how do you measure them? How do you prioritize them? Beyond just mapping out the ACLs, beyond just mapping out the permissions, going from there to remediation, to what to look at. There's a lot of books to be written about that, right? So we took a very different approach. We can talk more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
yeah.
Mike had it.
Yeah, I think you just answered the question, but I wanted to verify. The back-end graph database is Neo4j?
No.
No.
It's Trinity.
What's really cool about this is even in very, very large ADs, and we've tested it in very, very large ADs, it's wicked fast to enumerate AD. We actually changed the graph database that we used in the middle of the development cycle because we found yet another faster GraphDB to be able to generate these graph relationships as quickly as possible.
We're optimizing eventually to get this to run real time and detect attacks over this. So it's very, very important for us that this works at scale. So not Neo4j.
I think we're at time.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
We
thanks,
really
everybody.
appreciate it. Please download and try it.